Convicted pedophile Barry Bennell has been found guilty of more child sexual abuse after his latest trial at Liverpool Crown Court. Bennell has been found guilty of 5 indecent assault verdicts and 2 rape verdicts. The verdicts are continuing to come in. The court previously heard how Bennell, 64, exploited his position in order to manipulate, groom and abuse boys, making him a child molester on an industrial scale during the trial. The court heard Bennell compared to the child catcher from Chitty Chitty Bang Bang as he invited boys to his house where he had arcade games, a pool table, videos and exotic pets including a puma and a monkey. In his closing speech, prosecutor Nicholas Johnson QC told Liverpool Crown Court Bennell himself had described his house as a bit of a kid's paradise. Mr. Johnson said, "The child catcher in Chitty Chitty Bang Bang did it with cherry pie and lollipops. We suggest Mr. Bennell is a child molester on an industrial scale, and that's why he went to these lengths to get so many lads round to his house." Although it seems that Mr. Jones, or Mr. Bennell, was a skilled and relatively successful coach, we allege that he had a much darker side. He was also, we say, a predatory and determined pedophile. His particular predilection was prepubescent boys, he said. Bennell had groomed the parents of the complainants so he could carry on the abuse and even married the sister of Andy Woodward, who he has previously admitted abusing. Mr. Johnson said, "We suggest he put his own considerations, his own desires, before any other. He didn't care about the damage he caused. We know from the evidence he abused Andy Woodward. He buggered him, and then he married his sister. Just imagine. What does that tell you about his attitude to other people and their expendability to him?" Bennell, who appeared in court via video link due to illness, denied 48 counts of historical child sex abuse between 1979 and 1990. The 11 complainants, as well as witnesses who Bennell has admitted abusing, gave evidence about abuse by the former Crewe Alexandra coach, who was described as having a power hold over them. The court heard when he was a scout for Manchester City he was treated like God at the club's main road ground, and one complainant alleged chief scout and former player Ken Barnes had known about the abuse. One alleged victim said Bennell had never shown any remorse giving evidence in court. He said, "Him smirking on that screen, denying everything. He's shown no remorse, ever. Even the stuff he has admitted to, he's never given one apology and he still sits there." The court heard that the victim gave a statement to police in 1997 in which he said he had been abused by Bennell on about 20 occasions, but, he said, he estimated he had actually been abused on about 100 occasions, and added that Bennell had forced him to perform oral sex and had raped him on 7 to 10 occasions. Jurors have heard Bennell is a convicted sex offender who has served prison sentences in the UK and the United States. He has pleaded guilty to 7 counts of indecent assault related to his current trial. Mr. Johnson told the jury all of the complainants in the case had cared only about one thing: becoming a professional footballer. He said, "Many would do anything to achieve their dream. Barry Bennell knew that and he exploited that," referring to Bennell's decision not to give evidence in the trial. He told the jury, "You will remember that Mr. Bennell made repeated denials in interview, backed up by a request to take a lie detector test. We have 12 lie detectors in this court and I'm looking at you. The lie detector test is going into the witness box." Being asked the difficult questions and answering the difficult questions, if you can, Bennell shook his head at times as Mr. Johnson spoke. The court heard in one police interview the former Manchester City scout had told officers, "I was a manipulating, conniving bastard of a person, but I was not evil." Mr. Johnson told the jury, "Well, ladies and gentlemen, he was manipulating and conniving. He manipulated those boys and he is now trying to manipulate you." In her closing speech, Defense barrister Eleanor Laws QC told Liverpool Crown Court the 64-year-old had become a sitting target after admitting to child sexual offences in the 1990s. She said, "It may be tempting, in light of what I have said to you, it may be tempting in particular if you have loved ones at home to think, well, who cares about getting it right? He's a convicted pedophile." But she told the jurors to put their understandable potential revulsion about him to one side. She added, "The defendant is a known target and he coached these boys. They know when making allegations, whether truthful or not, that they are making allegations against a convicted pedophile." She detailed compensation claims made by some of the complainants and contact they had had with solicitors. The court heard one of the complainants as well as two victims Bennell had previously pleaded guilty to abusing, had launched a civil action against Manchester City in March 2016. Victim suffered post-traumatic stress after Bennell used horror films and his pet puma to groom boys before abusing them. An alleged victim of former football coach Barry Bennell told a court he has been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder since reporting his abuse. The complainant told Liverpool Crown Court he had stayed at Bennell's house in school holidays when he played as a schoolboy for Crewe Alexandra. He described being abused by the 64-year-old on the sofa of his home and in a bunk bed. The court heard since reporting the allegations to police he had been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder and had experienced flashbacks and violent nightmares about Bennell. He said, "I had a number of these flashbacks over a number of weeks. I was told by the GP that was normal." The court heard the complainant had alleged 3 incidents of abuse, but had later been told by fellow youth footballers he may also have been abused by Bennell when he was asleep. He said, "I know there were occasions they have said they witnessed him touching me on the sofa when I was asleep. That is a bit hard to take. That's led to thinking, how many more times did it happen? What else happened?" He said he was first touched by Bennell when he was sitting on the sofa watching Nightmare on Elm Street. He said he had a pet puma, like a wild cat, that was always in the room and it was kind of an intimidating atmosphere. I remember him saying that I should sit next to him on the sofa. That wasn't uncommon, but it was uncommon for him to hug me. The complainant said when he flinched, Bennell stopped touching him and continued watching the film. Bennell then started to touch him again, but he moved away, he said. He described the coach abusing him again on 2 occasions when he was in the top bunk of a bunk bed, but said Bennell left the room after he kicked out and moved to get away from him. Describing the second incident in the bunk, he said, "That time he put his hand over my mouth a bit. Again I just kind of kicked away and then he disappeared out of the room." The complainant told police he decided to come forward after seeing media coverage of other former youth footballers alleging abuse by Bennell in 2016. He said, "I feel guilty because I never said anything. I now know the level of abuse that some of the others would have gone through for sustained periods, and if I said something, and I know everyone else probably feels the same. But if I had said something, maybe that could have stopped." He said he was approached by police in the 1990s but denied having been abused by Bennell. He said, "I didn't want to open the box in my head. I just wanted to forget about it." Eleanor Laws QC, defending, said, "I suggest to you, you rather got swept up in these allegations and that what you have said Barry Bennell did to you is not the truth." He replied, "I totally disagree. Bennell played tickling game with boys that would end with his hands in their underpants." One of Bennell's victims, who he had pleaded guilty to abusing in 1998, said he knew of 4 men who had been coached by Bennell, including former Wales manager Gary Speed, who had gone on to take their own lives. But the jury was later told there was no evidence to link their deaths to Bennell. In transcripts of police interviews which were read in court, Bennell, who has changed his name to Richard Jones, told the police about his grooming process and abuse of boys. but claimed the complainants in the case were jumping on the bandwagon following publicity. In January, his accusers, Chris Unsworth, told the court that Bennell preyed on him after he was scouted for Manchester City as a junior, and the abuse began straight away after the defendant started giving him lifts to the club's then Plant Lane training ground. Unsworth previously waived his anonymity when he appeared on the BBC's Victoria Derbyshire show in November 2016 to discuss his alleged abuse. He was the second of 11 complainants who entered the witness box at Liverpool Crown Court to say they were victims of devious paedophile Bennell. Mr. Unsworth said the abuse started in the car with a game devised by Bennell called Follow Me, which the defendant is said to have engineered with other complainants. He said he would move his hands around your body on the outside of your clothes, tickle you, and you would have to do the same to him, but he said the game would keep going until his hands were inside your shirt or inside your underpants, and it happened regularly. If not every time Bennell gave him a lift. Abuse also took place at Bennell's then home in the Peak District, he said. Once again, he alleged Follow Me would initiate sexual activity, and Bennell would allegedly often end up in bed in the middle of two boys. He said you would always do what he said. You was hoping he would not ask you. He alleged that sexual activity escalated and eventually led to Bennell raping him about half a dozen times. The first time I will never forget it, he said. I was just crying. The pain. It felt like it went on for hours, but it was probably 2 or 3 minutes. He said sexual contact with Bennell diminished as he hit puberty, and it ended when he walked away from football after thinking he had had enough. The court heard he was also allegedly abused on trips to Wales with Bennell. He described staying in a haunted house with other boys where he said the coach would put on horror films for them to watch. He said that was his scene. He would try and scare the lads. He added, I can recall one time being in a dormitory which was full of bunk beds and somebody waking up with a sheep's or ram's head on their bunk bed, or actually in their sleeping bag. Everybody was petrified, but he said none of the boys spoke to each other about the alleged abuse. Asked why he had not told anyone else, he said, 1. They wouldn't believe you, and 2. I'm going to jeopardize where I want to go as a professional footballer. Cross-examined by Eleanor Laws QC. Defending, Mr. Unsworth denied discussing possible financial compensation with the solicitor or other alleged victims. He said, this is not about compensation, this is about justice.